Welcome, sleepless spirit. I'm your storyteller tonight, here to guide you gently into the shadows of slumber, where dreams take over and worries fade away. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video and subscribe for more bedtime tales, whispered just for you. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you watching from, and what time is it as you listen tonight? And if there's a story you've been longing to hear, something spooky, something comforting, tell me. I'm always listening. Now, tuck yourself in. Let the darkness wrap around you like a warm blanket. It's time to let go and drift into the story. Sell my car. That was about it. There were no games, no drama, no strange expectations, just a straightforward transaction. My name is Alyssa, and I was 25 years old at the time, and I lived in a small, quiet area outside of Dayton, Ohio. I had a silver 2008 Toyota Corolla back then, and it ran perfectly. It wasn't the type of car that would draw attention, but it was dependable, economical on petrol, and had been mine since college. I took good care of it. It's a quiet place with nothing unusual ever happening around. It may be a little monotonous, but it's safe. At least I thought so. I was finally earning more money at my job as a dental assistant, and I had my eye on a Subaru Outback that had space for groceries, hiking gear, and possibly even a large dog someday. I didn't want to trade the car in because I knew how that worked and that I would be insulted. I changed the oil on time and replaced the tires. Daniel, a friend of mine, recently sold his motorcycle on Craigslist and advised me that it was the best way to receive true value. He advised me to meet in public, bring someone with you if possible, and follow his straightforward advice to trust my instincts. I was cautious, or at least I thought I was cautious. I am a meticulous and fair person, so I advertised a Corolla with nice photographs and a clear description. It runs excellent and has 118,000 miles on it. I recently detailed it for $3,800. Oboe. I also had the tires rotated and made sure the tank was full so that anyone test driving wouldn't run out. I stopped a man who offered $2,000 sight unseen and claimed he would send a driver with a cashier's check, and another guy asked if he could exchange. He was probably too trusting, because within an hour the messages began to come in, some of which were obviously spam or scammers, for a quad bike and a dog band once more. But at 6:30 that night, I received a message that seemed normal. Is the car still available? It was from the same 937 area code as mine, so I said, yes, it is. Hello, I'd love to come see it tonight. What's your address? I asked a few minutes later, pausing because I had already told myself that since my roommate Clara was working double shift that evening and my driveway was remote, and there were no street lights on my side of the block, I suggested that we meet at the well-lit Kroger parking lot on Bellrook Avenue. I'd prefer to come to your place because I don't really like driving around at night. I'll be quick, he said, which annoyed me. I sent a text saying, sorry, I'm only meeting at public places. I had no response for an hour, and then a single word was blocked. The following day was calm, and I only received one. Alyssa, I noticed that your Corolla listing was still up for grabs. I answered, yes, would you like to meet? This reply appeared promising, but it came from a different phone, with the same area code. We decided to meet at the same Kroger lot. I asked him his name, and he said, Jake. Sure, I'm free tonight after 7. Where's good for you? He never supplied a picture of himself, so I didn't pursue that. I suggested him to park near the garden center because it was typically well lit and not too crowded at that hour. I didn't ask many questions because I wanted to think most people were just decent. Around 6:50 p.m., I used a microfiber towel to clean the car one last time before driving over the air, which was still chilly enough to see when a black Honda Civic pulled into the lot at 7:04. I remember immediately noticing that it had no license plates, just a dealer sticker and a temporary tag that was barely taped to the inside of the rear window. It was breath, but enough to make your fingers stiff if you stayed outside for too long. A man who was around 6 feet 1 inch and wearing a hoodie pulled tight over a ball cap stepped out of the car across from mine. I got out of my Corolla and waved to him. "You, Jake." He hesitated for a half second, but I smiled sweetly and said, "Okay, feel." He strolled around the car without asking any questions, but he was free to look around. After maybe 2 minutes, he glanced up at me and said, "I don't want it." He peeked into the wheel wells and through the windows. He turned without saying anything more, walked back to his car, and sat down. "Oh," I answered, somewhat astonished. "Okay, sure. Thanks for coming out anyway." I waited awkwardly for a moment before getting back into my car, but as soon as I turned on the engine and saw his headlights turn on as well, my stomach dropped. I sat there and watched his automobile in the rearview mirror without moving, idled behind me, so I carefully reversed, trying not to think too much about it. Perhaps he was simply traveling in the same direction, which was feasible, but when I went onto the main road, did he follow me in the same lane and at the same speed? I turned right, and he did the same. At the next light, I went left, and he followed me for 3 more turns, staying behind me. By this point, my heart was pounding so hard that I was unable to pretend any longer, so I made a full circle around a block of suburban houses and headed back toward downtown. He stayed with me, and I was shivering, want to go home, but I wouldn't allow him to follow me there. Instead, I turned into a Speedway gas station, pulled into a spot close to the pumps, and turned off the engine. I could see people there with bright lights and cameras, and I watched him slow down and continue driving in my side mirror. Exhaling, I gripped the wheel till my knuckles became white, but 30 seconds later, his car returned around the block and stopped into the lot next to a dark hardware store. He just sat there with the lights off, so I called Daniel instead of my roommate, who didn't answer. "Where are you?" "Hey," I said in a trembling whisper. "Remember that Craigslist car beer? I think he's following me." "Speedway, the one off Wilmington Pike," he said in an instantaneously alert voice. "Stay there. I'm going out in 10 minutes. Every time a customer pulled into the Speedway, I hoped it would divert Jake's attention, but he remained parked and I observed his silhouette, never showing his face. When Daniel arrived in his raised red, I was relieved when the vehicle next to me drew up, rolled down his window, and gave me the thumbs up. At that point, the black Civic peeled out, leaving no lights, and disappeared into the night. Later, when I checked both text threads once more, I saw something that made my anger boil. Both Jake's and the first guy's numbers were cold. They were just 1 digit apart. One had messaged me the previous evening, expressing interest in visiting my home, and the other met and followed me later. Their names and area codes were nearly the same, and Daniel assisted me in filing a police report the following day. But nothing came of it. Burner phones know the thing that troubled me the most was not what actually happened, but rather what nearly happened if I had allowed that first guy to enter my home after Jake. I never sold the car on Craigslist. Instead, I traded it in for $3,100. I might have received more, but I didn't care anymore. I don't know what he wanted. Maybe he was trying to find out where I lived, maybe worse. But I never used Craigslist again, since certain things are just not worth the risk. I left. If I hadn't stopped at that gas station, if I'm being totally honest, I've never liked Craigslist, not because it's difficult to use or anything, but because there's something about letting a stranger into your life, even for a brief moment, that just doesn't sit right with me. Perhaps it's the anonymity, or perhaps it's the normality of it all. But when you're giving something away for free, it doesn't feel right. Particularly a large piece of furniture. It signifies that someone is about to enter your life, and you won't have much control over who they are. That's what happened during the spring semester of my junior year of college. A modest 2-bedroom rental home off of Miller Avenue in I lived with my roommate and closest friend, Lena, in a small college town in Indiana. We had bonded during our freshman year because she was hilarious, sharp-tongued, and had a strange fixation with romantic movies. Our house was simple, with peeling paint on the walls. We were both thrilled when we arrived home, since we had just signed a lease for an off-campus apartment that was much nicer than our current one, newer, closer to university, and no more annoying than the kitchens and even floorboards and heater that moaned like a dying animal. As we prepared to move, we discovered that we had a few items we didn't want to take with us, mainly junky furniture that had barely made it through 2 years of college living. One of those items was the couch, a huge beige monstrosity with frayed arms, and we knew it wasn't worth selling, but it was still in good condition, so someone with a truck and no standards might want it. Lena decided to list it on Craigslist for free, even though it had a permanent dent in the middle cushion. It had come from Lena's parents' basement and had endured who knows how many years of abuse before ending up in our living room. Free. Couch. Slightly worn, but still comfortable. Needs to be picked up. Located near Miller. And third message for details was the listing's description, which was written up and posted under the free section. She didn't put her phone number, just the Craigslist email reply option, and within a couple of days, we sort of forgot about it. No one responded right away, and we were busy packing. Then on a Thursday afternoon, Lena said, "Hello," I looked up from the box of mugs I was bubble wrapping and said, "Oh, who?" "Someone's coming for the couch later." Laughed some guy named Greg. "I think I've been messaging with him. He said he has a truck and can come today around 5. "All right, hope he shows up," I replied. We moved the couch closer to the door and made a path to make it easier to carry out the boxes, which were stacked everywhere and labeled with things like kitchen, bathroom, and other random trash. At 4:45, we didn't give it much thought. At 5:02, the doorbell rang, and Lena went to the bathroom. "You must be Greg," Lena said. "Yeah, here for the answer," and I followed, washing my hands on my pants. A man, perhaps in his mid-30s, appeared on our porch, tall, wearing a baseball cap and a zip-up hoodie. He grinned in that nice way people do when they're trying not to seem like a threat. "Couch." She moved aside, and we opened the door for him. He inspected the couch and circled it as if examining a used automobile. "Looks good," he remarked. "You guys sure?" Lena said it was too big for our new place, so we struck up a conversation as he kept circling the couch. He explained that he was moving to a new apartment across town and needed furniture, and that he found the listing that morning and drove over after work. He didn't seem strange, not very much, but I felt strange. Perhaps it was his eyes, which darted around the room as if cataloging items. He inquired as to where we were relocating, and Lena simply said, "Closer to campus," without providing any further details. His truck was parked in the driveway rather than the curb, as if he desired a rapid escape. After we helped him move the couch out to his pickup, it took the 3 of us to fit it through the door and down the porch stairs. He thanked us and drove away without saying anything more. We watched the truck drive away down Miller Street from the porch. "Well, that's that," Lena murmured, "good riddance," and I mumbled, "That thing was a backbreaker." At around 9:30 that evening, Lena yelled out. I stepped over when she put up her phone and said, "Hey, that guy texted me again." I apologized for disturbing her, but I believe I left my wallet at your house. "Could you check?" I scowled and noticed that his wallet was hardly inside. I know what she said, but strange. We looked about the living room in case we hadn't seen a wallet before, but perhaps it had slipped under something. At first, nothing was there, but when after moving one of the accent chairs close to the window, I noticed something dark hidden, almost in the middle of the chair, a black wallet. I carefully picked it up, but something didn't feel right. There was only a bank card and 3 crumpled $1 bills inside. No identification. Why would he even bring this about? Lena, he had no identification, no pictures, no receipts, and not even a library card. She bit her lip. Should we return it before we made up our minds? He texted Greg again, saying, I can stop by in 10 minutes. Let me know if we didn't reply to all three. When I went to switch on the porch light a few minutes later, I paused, because there was someone in our yard. It was him, and he wasn't heading up the path. Instead, he was strolling slowly between our side yard and the neighbor's driveway, not like someone who was disoriented. She muttered, Someone is snooping. I ducked back from the glass and took her to the upstairs window, where we could see a portion of the backyard. He was back there now, peering at the house, and we both became cold. Lena remarked softly, He's not here for his wallet. We observed him hover about our back steps for a while before he moved into the next neighbor's yard, seemingly circling. 5 minutes later, there was a knock on the front door, but we chose not to answer. As soon as we heard another tap, we snuck to the living room window and saw that Greg was standing on the porch with his hands in his pockets. He knocked louder, and Lena moved toward the door without opening it. Hey, she said. We found your wallet through the door. Excellent, he said. Can you open the door? No, we'll just give it to you through the window. There was a delay. Then she replied, Why don't I just come in and say thank you? I was going to give you a small reward or something. He began raising his voice, saying, louder this time, We'll give you the wallet, that's it. You think I'm some kind of criminal or something? No, I jumped in, he said, but we're just not comfortable. You can take the wallet and go, he said, mocking. Come on, I've got some. Lena grabbed the wallet, went to the side window, and threw it onto the lawn, saying, There's your wallet. Now leave or we're calling the police. Cash in my car. Just let me in for a second, I said. But your wallet only had $3. He moved closer to the door and muttered, You looked inside. Huh, police officers. He approached and grabbed it, then knocked once more. Let me give you the reward, he said, sounding almost begging. Lena yelled through the door-go, and at last he did. We sat up late that night, and at one point, at approximately 2 a.m, every sound made us jump. I thought I saw headlights slow down close to our street, but perhaps that was just paranoia. Lexa showed me her messages with him the following morning, and he never got back to her. We filed a police report just in case, and we didn't bring up the couch incident in any future Craigslist transactions, but we both agreed that the wallet was not lost. Rather, it was planted, because he needed an excuse to return, possibly to enter the house or worse, and it was covering a free couch. If something doesn't feel right, don't trust someone just because they appear. Was never one of those people who got terrified easily. I grew up in a small Oklahoman town named Red Vale, where children rode their bikes in the middle of the road, and everyone knew who you were before you even introduced yourself. Normal people never used Craigslist alone. I was accustomed to the leisurely pace of rural life, the seclusion of lengthy country roads, and the eerie silence that accompanied the stillness at night. But until one summer permanently altered that, it was hot, dry, and dull. About 15 minutes into the country, I had just moved into my first home outside of town limits. It had a large open yard and was adjacent to a network of old trails that were once used by dirt bikes and ATVs. Although they were mostly overgrown now, they were still passable, and I remember thinking it would be cool to get a golf cart or side-by car. At the time, I believed that Craigslist still had some trustworthy vendors, so I developed the habit of using it to find a side gig to pass the time on the weekends. I wasn't seeking to spend a bunch, just anything second-hand, but it looked like a nice place to start. After about 2 weeks of looking through postings over coffee every morning, I came across what appeared to be a Gem Club car golf cart in good condition. It cost $1,300, but it had to go. The photos showed a forest green cart, in perfect condition, parked in what appeared to be someone's barn, was straightforward, with only a few words stating that it was in excellent condition and had just been serviced. The seller's name was Dale. and the number had a red Vale area code. It was posted less than half an hour before I noticed it, so I immediately wrote a message asking if the golf cart was still for sale. He responded in roughly 10 minutes, and if you're serious, it can still be seen today. We exchanged a few texts, and he didn't ask me many questions or come off as strange or pushy. He simply mentioned that he lived about 10 miles outside of town, close to Cedar Fork. I thought that if he lived in the area, which is known for large land parcels, dense forests, and winding dirt roads, he must have some property and likely used the cart to get around it. I asked if I could come see it that afternoon, and he replied, "Sure, but come around for 30, because he had some stuff to take action sooner." When I entered the address he supplied me into my GPS, the pin fell on a lengthy road named Mockingbird Hollow Lane, which I didn't know, but Google Maps verified was real, just a dirt road that divided off a bigger one named Dixon Ridge about 4:15. I got my wallet, my keys, and a water bottle and drove off without telling anyone, mostly because I didn't give it much thought. Looking back, that was probably the worst thing I ever did. When I first turned onto Mockingbird Hollow Lane, the drive was serene, with only golden fields on either side and the occasional rusted mailbox leaning from years of weather. However, as the road narrowed, trees began to thicken on both sides, and the sunlight began to cut stripes through the canopy above. I had cell service about halfway down the road when I came to the pin, which was just a thin gravel driveway with 2 wooden fence posts on either side and no gate. I double-checked the address, and it was the same as the text, so I parked off to the side where the driveway widened slightly ahead of it. As soon as I turned off the engine, I noticed a man approaching me from around the bend in the driveway. He waved and appeared to be in his mid-50s, with short grey hair, jeans, and a faded flannel shirt. At first glance, there was nothing particularly strange about him. We walked side by side down the driveway, which curved around a clearing with a large weathered barn off to one side, parked under a lean to attach a golf cart to the barn. "You heard about the golf cart?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Dale?" And he nodded. "Sure, come on, I'll take you to it." Looking at my face, Dale remarked, "Oh, not this one. The green one from the photos was red and had a ripped seat. The green ones are a bit further out. Had to store it behind the property. Keeps the wife from nagging me about cluttering the barn." He smiled a little, almost rehearsed then. "You mind? I'll drive us over. It's a little bit of a ride, but it'll give you a chance to see how it handles," he said, patting the side of the red cart and gesturing for me to board. I paused a little. A knot started to build in my stomach, but I couldn't pinpoint why. I tried to sound casual as we climbed in, and when he turned the key, the cart, one of the quicker ones with off-road tires and a lift kit roared to life. After rolling past the barn, the trail became narrow and plunged into the woods. It was made of mud and roots rather than paved or gravelled, and the more we went, the more overgrown it became. I inquired, "How big is your property?" After a little while, I realized it was roughly 40 acres, most of which I inherited from "Is the cartway out here for a reason?" My elderly guy, who was a recluse and disliked neighbours, asked without glancing at me as we continued to ride. 5 minutes later, 10. "Well," he answered after a pause, "technically the cart ain't exactly mine," I said, trying to sound even. "What are you saying?" My heart rate was already rising when I asked, and he gave me a nearly grinning look before saying, "I'll explain when we get there." That was all. There was no follow-up, chuckle, just stillness. Then he stepped on the pedal harder, and we began climbing a hill through a more constrained section of trail. I realized that, for the last 10 minutes, we had not passed any buildings, or indications of life, no fences, sheds, or indications that anybody other than him had returned here. When I answered, "I think I'm good, I'll pass on the cart," primal really kicked in. Dale didn't slow down. Instead, he laughed softly. "Oh, come on, we're already way out here. Might as well take a look." "No, I'm serious, let's go back." I didn't wait for an explanation when the cart ran over a log near the top of the hill. Instead, I leapt, my boot struck the ground hard, and I staggered sideways into the thicket, scraping my elbow. Even look at me this time. It's too late for that boy. I stumbled over a root and landed in a patch of wet leaves, but I didn't stop when I heard the cart's brakes screech behind me. I didn't turn around and instead darted into the woods, running branches that lashed my arms and face, jumped up and continued running, thinking I heard footsteps behind me every few seconds, but when I stopped, it was completely silent. After what seemed like an eternity, I discovered a thin stream and began to follow it, which suggested that, eventually it would lead to a road, or at least somewhere that wasn't on Dale's land. Crouched low, moved quickly, my clothes were soaked and covered in burrs, and I still didn't have cell service. It took me almost 40 minutes to arrive at a dirt road that wasn't the one I had entered. It was older and less travelled, but I could follow tyre tracks. I tracked the 2 miles in silence, jumping at every sound, until I finally came to a clearing where I could see the roof of my truck in the distance. However, something was amiss. The driveway was now fenced, with a heavy rusted chain wrapped around it. I didn't pause to think, so I sprinted past the gate through a little gap in the trees, got into my vehicle, and drove till I had my signal back. I pulled into a gas station close to town and sat there for 20 minutes, trembling. I called the sheriff's office and reported the listing on Craigslist, but they were unable to do anything because they didn't have a genuine identity or evidence that anything had happened. I never received a follow-up, and I never came across that trail again, either because the item was removed or because the number stopped functioning. I still wonder about how deep into the woods we drove and what was waiting at the end of that trailer shack, a hole in the ground, someone else now. Whenever I see an internet sale that seems too good to be true, Dale, if that was even his name, disappeared into the trees like smoke. The first thing that comes to mind whenever he says, "Oh, no, we're into deep now, son, and I never ever ride with strangers again." I'm not proud of how desperate I was at the time. I was completely broke in 2015 when I relived that night in my mind. I had just moved to a small town outside of Louisville, Kentucky, and was attempting to start over after a difficult breakup and even more difficult months of living on my cousin's couch. I had finally managed to scrape together enough money to rent a small 1-bedroom apartment in a duplex. A mattress on the floor, a folding chair, and a few cardboard boxes acting as a makeshift table are the only furnishings to mention. Every night after working a full shift at the gas station near Route 146, I would return home and take a shower in the filthy tiny bathroom microwave. I nearly ritualistically sat on the floor and scrolled through Craigslist's free section, looking for something inexpensive, like a lamp, a nightstand, or a used microwave, in the hopes of finding a miracle that would make the space feel less empty and less like a hollow transition between before and after that night. I came across an item that made me a little queasy, but in a good way. It said, "Free flat screen works need gone tonight in the Charlestown area." There was no nonsense, no explanation, just a grainy picture of a really attractive flat screen television. The TV was on, showing a paused screen from a nature broadcast on ocean coral or something like, and I was seated on what appeared to be a wooden floor in a nearly empty room. I clicked on the contact link and wrote a brief, courteous message saying, "Hello, I'm interested in the TV still available." I didn't expect a response. I looked at the time and saw that it was 8:45 p.m., but within 5 minutes I received a text from a 500 number. "Yes, I still have it, and you can pick it up tonight after 9:30. The address they provided was in Charlestown, approximately a 20-minute drive away. I had never really driven to that neighborhood before, but Google Maps didn't show anything unusual, so I replied back, "Cool, I'll head that way, thanks." I thought I could finish dinner, grab my keys, and arrive there just after 9:30. There was no response to it, but I didn't give it much thought. By 9:25, I was traveling down a string of peaceful roads in my beat-up Civic, and the further I went into Charlestown, the more rural and gloomy it seemed. The address was on Maple Hollow Lane, a dead-end gravel road, and when I pulled up carefully, my headlights bounced off potholes and areas of undergrowth. The older houses were boarded up, and others had yards so overgrown that it was difficult to tell if anyone lived there at all. Pushing in from the sides, the home was the final one on the right, set back about 50 feet from the road. It didn't seem horrible, but it was strange. The porch light was on, but it was weak and flickering. The windows were all black, and the curtains were drawn. No car was in the driveway. My gut clenched when I texted again, "I'm here," and almost instantly received a response, "Come on in, doors open." I recall sitting in my car for a moment, staring at people usually meet you outside or at least open the door and wave you in. So I had never seen that message on Craigslist telling me to just come in. However, leaving without at least checking felt like giving up the one nice thing to be able to have in my apartment. My sneakers crunched on the gravel in the front yard, and there were no porch stairs. There were only two broken concrete slabs leading to the door. I knocked once, more out of habit than anything else, and got no response. "Hello," I said, gently pushing when the door opened. It creaked. I wish I was exaggerating, but it really did sound like something from a movie. Then the musty smell hit me, as if the place hadn't been occupied on a regular basis. It wasn't nearly rotten, but it was unnerving because the layout was mostly empty. Was open, revealing a living room, kitchen, and hallway that could be seen. From the front door, the only light was a tiny lamp in the far corner by the kitchen, with a single yellow bulb glowing. I called again, but no one answered, and then I heard a woman's voice. "Yeah, back here," said a voice from further within the house. Something about the tone was informal, almost happy to informal. Perhaps I entered and left. I moved toward the hallway where the voice had come from, and as I approached, I saw something odd. The door was partially open behind me. The living room was empty, save for a few packing boxes and a coat draped over a kitchen chair, and the hardwood floors groaned beneath my boots. One of those attic ladders had been brought down in the hallway closet, and from above the still perfect darkness, not the kind that comes from shadows, it seemed as though you were peering into a space that had swallowed light completely. Then I noticed a woman, possibly in her mid-40s, standing close to the bottom of the ladder in the kitchen. She was wearing jeans and a loose hoodie, barefoot, with her arms crossed and her hair tied up in a messy bun. She didn't smile or move. "Well, I'm okay, sure," I said nervously. "I can try. Why, I don't know. I was raised to." I couldn't get it down myself, so I just nodded toward the attic TVS up there. "I hope that's okay." I stood motionless for a second. Be courteous. I didn't want to come across as impolite, so I thought, just grab it and go. She nodded once and disappeared into the kitchen. Disappearing around the corner, suddenly, I grabbed the attic ladder and began climbing, the air growing colder with each step, not figuratively. A noticeable temperature drop caused my head to break through the attic opening, and I stopped when it was completely dark. I took my phone out of my pocket and switched on the flashlight. But what I saw still bothers me. An old wooden chair was positioned in the middle of the attic space, with nothing else nearby except the chair, and I heard a footstep in the attic, behind me. So I whipped the flashlight toward the sheet that was spread out underneath it like a tarp, but the TV showed no indication of it. At least my entire body stiffened my fingers. I tightened my hold on the ladder when I heard breathing. That wasn't mine. It wasn't heavy or strained, but it was steady and soft, perhaps 10 feet ahead of me in the dark. I didn't even believe I had climbed back down. With my hands shaking, I almost slipped, missed a rung with my foot, scraped my shin, landed hard, and staggered backward without seeing the woman or hearing her voice. I turned and ran out the front door of the living room without bothering to close it, heading straight for my car. I didn't breathe until I was back on the main road, locking all the doors and windows and sitting in my bedroom with the light on in an attempt to relax. After a while, I checked Craigslist again, but the ad was gone. I texted the number to see what would happen, but I didn't see the U still had the TV up there, and I waited till the following day, but nothing came back. Eventually, I tried calling, but it was disconnected. I never reported it. So what would I say? Someone encouraged me to get into it. I wonder how close I came to something horrible. What would have happened if I had continued climbing, sat in that chair, or waited? And how many times that advertisement was posted and removed, as well as whether the next person wasn't waiting up there in the dark attic for a free TV. As fortunate as I was, I assumed it was simply a modelling job, since that's how things always begin. So normal and plausible. It was 2013, and I was 21 years old, living in a suburb outside of Santa Clarita, California. I'd been trying for a year or so to go into commercial acting and modelling. Nothing major, just little things like local advertisements, product promotion jobs, and a few extras in music videos. When you're young and trying to make your way, you take what you can get. I was working as a waitress at a steakhouse and applying for jobs online nearly every day. Since I didn't have an agent, I had to hunt for my own opportunities, and Craigslist was one of the best places for that. Also, I believed at the time. That was the mistake. Prior to all of this, I had completed a few small paid shoots, including a spot at a car dealership. I wasn't famous or anything, but I was proud of my small portfolio, which included a wedding catalogue ad and a student film for a college in Burbank. I even had a friend help me put together a comp card with some headshots. My objective was to transition into promotional modelling, ideally for events or products that had large brands behind them, but I was barely making ends meet. And when your standards start to dwindle after 3 nights of eating canned soup, you start to think, it's just a quick job. I'll be careful. I'll ask the right questions, which is exactly what I thought the day the Craigslist post I saw stated. Looking for a female model between the ages of 18 and 30 to help promote a new product line like modeling and promotional work for a local business, no nudity professional. The headline read, simple model needed for product shoot paid gig, $250 per day. I recall reading the term professional setting 3 or 4 times, since it made me feel more at ease and formal. It sounded like one of those event gigs where you pass out brochures or pose with a product display. Setting quick and easy pay. Please email with experience and at least 1 photo emailed, including 2 of my portfolio shots, 1 of my headshot, and 1 of my full body along with a brief resume that included my commercial acting experience, catalogue work, and promotional event experience. I had done similar work at a tech conference in Anaheim the year prior, so it looked common enough. The following morning, he responded, saying, "Hello, thanks for your response. I like your look and I think you'd be perfect for this promo campaign. It's a new product line launching next month, and I'd be willing to drive within an hour if the pay was right." His name was Eli. "I'm in the Mission Grove area, not far from you, and I'd love to meet with you this week to go over the specifics and show you a sample of the product. Before we make a reservation, let me know what day works best for you." There was no business name. Website that ought to have raised the biggest red flag, but I persuaded myself that perhaps it was just a startup trying to be discreet. I responded by asking for more information about the product and if we could meet in a public area, like a cafe. He replied that he was extremely busy and preferred to hold meetings at his home. Where he had the second red sign was the product samples. But since I was destitute and my phone bill had just bounced the week before, I persuaded myself that I would simply go for the day. I even casually mentioned it to my roommate. When she asked if I wanted her to come, I smiled and replied, "No, it's not a big deal. I've got this quick gig interview thing in Mission Grove. I'll be back in like an hour or 2. His last words were, "Calm down. Just a little modeling thing. I'll text you." His address was in a newer apartment building close to several industrial parks and gas stations, not quite residential. Commercial. When I arrived at Amber Pines Apartments, which was gated and spotless. I texted him, "Hey, I'm here." A minute later, he responded, "Come to see, and I'll buzz you in." I ascended the stairs, paused for a moment at the door because of the silence, and knocked for a few seconds. He remarked, "Hey, Your Grace, right?" I nodded, "Yeah, before." The door opened. Eli was in his 30s or early 40s, slim, clean-shaven, and wearing black trousers and a sweatshirt. He wasn't what I expected. There was no clipboard, no samples, no lights, and no other people about. He moved aside, so I entered. The apartment had no paintings on the walls, no furniture other than a couch and a folding table, and no lights or backgrounds. He gestured to the couch and said, "You can sit," adding, "I'll get the stuff." My roommate texted me a meme as I was sitting with my phone buzzing in my bag. I didn't respond. Instead, I felt a knot in my gut develop. He returned from a side room with a manila folder, and what appeared to be "This is the product," he added, passing me a tiny bottle of perfume. "It's a scent line, and we're working on how to package and market it." He sat on a kitchen bar stool across from me, gazing, and nodded as I turned the bottle in my palm. "You've done this kind of thing before." He grinned and asked me where I lived, if I had a boyfriend, and if I was working anyplace else. His questions quickly became personal, so I avoided some of them. I nodded again, but this time I was more guarded. They provided evasive responses, and he began to lean closer. "You look good," he added, "and we could probably use you for more than just the one shoot." I faked a casual smile, but he just stared at me, and I thought you'd be after a long pause. He continued, "A good fit, but you'd need to be at ease with close-up camera work. You're happy with modeling your fragrance, holding the bottle in your hand, and spritzing it on your neck. We might even do some video, which is okay." I said, "I'll need to get up quickly." When I sent him the complete information before I committed, he remained motionless and simply sat on the stool, staring up at me with a blank expression. Eventually, he murmured, "Okay, no problem," he said. "You really sure you don't want the job?" Behind me, as I was already halfway to the door. Something wasn't quite right, too soft, as if disappointed, I said, trying my voice to be firm. "Yeah, I'm sure." He opened the door for me, and I slipped out, muttering a little, "Thank you." I literally sprinted down the stairs when I got home. I felt strange, uneasy, and upset, not scared, just shaken. I didn't tell my roommate everything, just that something didn't feel right, and I quit the job. Life went on when I acquired a new job as a waiter at a new restaurant in West Hollywood 2 weeks later. However, a month later, while idly browsing through the local news on my phone during my lunch break, I came across a headline that made my entire body freeze. "Man arrested for stalking and threatening aspirations." When I clicked on it, I saw the face of Eli, or more accurately, Elijah Barnett, 38, who is accused of fabricating modeling positions online, enticing women to his apartment under the pretense of auditions, and then stalking them if they didn't accept. Sent her more than 50 emails following one meeting. Another claimed that he waited outside her apartment 4 hours. A third said that he was attempting to follow her. And after a second meeting, I sat motionless in the staff restroom, reading every word, with a knot in my stomach. I'm still baffled as to why he didn't follow me. There's a thin line between a job opportunity and a trap when you're desperate and young. I always told myself that I was street smart and knew how to avoid falling into that trap. After that day, perhaps I didn't give him enough time to continue. Perhaps I didn't seem vulnerable enough. Or perhaps I was just lucky. I saved a screenshot of the article and sent it to myself with the subject "Close Call." Identify warning signs, but the truth is that your brain goes to great lengths to convince you that something is safe. I never again searched Craigslist. 4 jobs after that. And even today, over 10 years later, I still worrying about the day that the flat was empty. Unblinking glare and how almost I became one of the ladies in the article. It wasn't just a modeling job. It was bait, and I nearly bit. I was just 18 at the time, and even though it has been over 20 years, I can still vividly recall that day and how everything went south. Back then, I lived in Cedar Hills, a quiet suburb outside of Spokane, Washington, and had just graduated from high school that summer. I was in that strange limbo between finishing school and figuring out what came next, and I went from something as mundane as selling an old laptop to something that still keeps me up some nights. Wasn't leaving for college right away like some of my friends, because my family couldn't afford it and I hadn't found a job yet. Instead, I stayed home and played games, watched movies, or browsed the internet. My parents were encouraging, but they always asked me what I was looking forward to next. I did the one thing I probably shouldn't have done. When I finally received some graduation money from my family, I bought myself a brand new laptop. It wasn't anything fancy, just something sleeker and faster. The old one, a large Dell that cost me almost $2,000 when it was new, was still in good shape, but by tech standards, it was outdated. I thought I could sell it for a few $100s, so I cleaned it up, erased the hard drive, and put it up for $500 on Craigslist. A few hours later, I received a message from a man named Matt, who expressed interest and wanted to look it over. He was courteous and wrote in complete words. When Matt replied that he needed a laptop for work, I immediately thought we could meet at the Dunkin' across town sometime the following week. However, Matt wrote that he truly needed a laptop as soon as possible and asked if we could meet that day. If that works, I can stop by your place. I should have said no. I should have trusted my instincts, but I didn't. I didn't really want a stranger to come to my house, but I didn't have a car and I didn't feel like asking anyone to transport me elsewhere. My parents were away for the weekend visiting my aunt in Seattle, and I was at home by myself. Rather, I emailed him my address and instructed him to visit at approximately 6:30. At precisely 6:27 p.m., I was able to see through the slats and hear a car pull into the driveway. The engine of a dark green Dodge minivan that had clearly seen better days cut, the front door opened, and a man who appeared to be older than I had anticipated, possibly in his early 30s with a thin build, a dark hoodie, and I stood there, with the laptop in my arms, suddenly hesitant. But he wasn't alone. The passenger side opened, and another man, stockier, older, with short graying hair, and wearing a sleeveless shirt, got out. I told myself to calm down. You're being paranoid. They're just here for the laptop. I answered the door as they came, thinking it must be Matt. Yeah, he said, grinning momentarily. This is my buddy Rich, who's driving me around today. My friend. Car's in the shop. All right. I answered, taking a step back to allow them to enter. Laptops in the kitchen. We entered the house, and I set the laptop on the table mat. Rich leaned against the wall and asked, "May I use your bathroom?" "Sure, just down that hallway, first door on left," Rich questioned abruptly. He nodded at me, and as he left, Matt asked me a few questions regarding the laptop's RAM, battery life, and software. I did my best to respond, but I became sidetracked since I thought that Rich had been gone for far longer than necessary to use the restroom. And then I heard footsteps. I inquired, trying to seem casual. "Hey," not from the corridor, from above, the second level, and my heart fell. The bathroom was on the first floor, so there was no reason for him to go there. "Is your friend okay?" Matt's voice abruptly changed, but his eyes remained fixed on the screen. "He's fine," he stated firmly. "Don't worry about it." I winced as he put one hand on the laptop and the other tightened his hold on my shoulder. "Don't make this a problem," he urged. And that's when it all became clear to me that this wasn't a laptop sale, but rather a setup. And they weren't only trying to con me. I looked at the table where my phone was sitting, just out of reach, and I tried to remain calm. I shook my voice and said, "Take the laptop. Take whatever you want. Just don't hurt me." Matt didn't answer. He just gazed at his hold on my shoulder, became even more strong. So I turned away out of instinct or perhaps adrenaline and ran directly toward my dad's office, slamming the door and locking it with shaking hands. I had forgotten my phone. Foolish, but I sprang for a phone and dialed 911. My name is Jordan Meyer, and I live at 1146 Oakview Lane. Two men entered my home posing as laptop buyers, and I believe they are robbing me. One is upstairs. The dispatcher advised me to call for assistance. She asked me questions to keep me on the line, but I was having trouble breathing. I heard heavy footsteps thumping and doors opening upstairs as they ransacked my house. The dispatcher told me to stay in the room and not leave. Then I heard Matt and Rich yelling at each other, one from upstairs and the other by the kitchen. The front door then banged, and I peered out the window to see them racing back to the van while the cops screeched and they peeled out of the driveway tires. Arrived after what seemed like an eternity, they were nice, but didn't seem very optimistic. I told them what I knew about the Craigslist post and the emails, and they dusted a few surfaces for prints and made a brief inventory of what I called my parents and informed them that I was missing the final amount of over $3,000, which included my old Dell laptop, a small 24-inch kitchen TV, my mom's jewelry box from the master bedroom, $200 in cash from my sister's desk. And when they heard the severity in my voice, they hurried back home that night, angry not just over what had been stolen, but also that I had let strangers into our home, which I couldn't explain. At first, they believed I was kidding, but black humor wasn't out of character for me. Even claim it was my fault. I made several attempts to contact the police in the weeks that followed, but they never located the men. I doubt they made a serious effort. Craigslist scams were common in those days, so that summer I worked double time other than having fun or hanging out with friends. Worked shifts at a nearby grocery shop to reimburse my parents, and every dollar I made went toward making amends. I learned a lot that year, and I never again utilized Craigslist to sell anything, not unless I was meeting someone in a crowded place or during the day. Yet, I was fortunate because, in the grand scheme of things, they could have done much worse, and all it took was one email, one answer, and one snap choice. These days, I don't say much when people discuss buying or selling things online. However, I always think in the back of my mind that they weren't here for a laptop. Rather, they were here for a house without parents, for someone foolish enough to open the door, and regrettably, that day that was me. I had just turned 30 and had been living in my duplex for about 7 years when this occurred, so it was one of those old. I acquired it immediately after college with a tiny inheritance, and over time I patched it up room by room. 1940s homes are found all around Michigan. They have aged brick exteriors, weathered siding, narrow porches, and cracked concrete, but solid bones underneath. The house was divided evenly in the middle, with me living on the left side and renting out the right. It had 3 bedrooms and 1 bathroom on each side, with the only bathroom at the top of the narrow staircase. It had taken many long nights and YouTube tutorials, but I was proud of how it turned out. I'd had a few different renters over the years, but the latest family was perfect. Jason and Morgan were in their early 30s, just like me, and they had 3 children under 10. They were quiet and always paid their rent early, and we got along well enough that occasionally I would bring over leftover baked goods or assist Jason in shoveling snow off the walkway during the winter. We weren't exactly friends, but we were neighbors, and there wasn't much room, 1 bathroom for 5 people, which Morgan had repeatedly told me was driving her crazy. So I wasn't surprised. I was pleased for them when they informed me that they had moved to a larger house in Brighton with a larger yard and a more contemporary layout. They left at the end of April, and I gave them a month to move out without bothering them about minor details. When I eventually went to check the apartment, they had left behind a few odds, and before departing, Morgan emailed me to let me know that we didn't have enough space for everything, including a scratched wooden kitchen table. a stack of plastic beans full of children's toys, action figures, board games with missing pieces, a few old dolls, and a couple of those little Hot Wheels cars. After completing a patch job on the drywall and touching up some paint in the bedrooms at evening, I thought I could either sell the toys for a low price or donate them somewhere. I took a few quick pictures of the toys and put them on iBundled, everything on Craigslist for $20, just enough to possibly attract a local beer, but not enough to make me feel horrible if no one ever showed up. The table sold in 2 days, and a man from Ferndale picked it up and left money in my mailbox. The toys, however, were unbitten and unnoticed. I was not in a haste, so I put the listing up and forgot about it for a few weeks. Suddenly, I received a reply from Andy James, who said that he still had 273 subject toys and would want to visit on Saturday, if that works. I replied that Saturday afternoon worked and gave him my location. It was a nice, but overcast Saturday, one of those mid-May days, and my profile looked straightforward and unimpressive. The email address didn't trigger any red signals, and I had enough experience selling items online to not hesitate. On days when the trees are completely in blossom, the air smells like grass, and it rained last night, I completed cleaning the rental apartment in the morning at 12:30 p.m. Nothing special, just wiping the windows, washing the bathtub, and making sure the carpets didn't smell like crayons and juice boxes. Around 1:15, I heard a car come up and peered through the curtains to see that it was an old, rusty Ford F-150, perhaps from the early 1990s. I made a sandwich and sat by the window, browsing through my phone. The man who emerged was not particularly noteworthy at first glance. He was of average height and build, wearing dark jeans and a windbreaker, and despite the warmth, he wore a ball cap pulled low in his head. His red paint had long since faded to a dusty pink, and his muffler sounded like a dying lawnmower. After a time of watching him through dark sunglasses, he went slowly, not in a physically constrained manner, but rather like someone who had nowhere to go. I stepped out onto the porch, and as he got to the pathway, I yelled out, "Hey there," and he lifted a hand here for the I walked in, expecting to hear his footsteps behind me. But when I turned around, he was in the living room. "If you want to have a look, I'll grab a bag or two in case you need them. Toys, come on in, they're just inside the other unit." I unlocked the rental and pushed the door open. I answered, trying to keep things light, "You can come in," but he didn't move. Instead, he stood in the doorway just inside the threshold, one palm resting on the frame, eyes carefully searching the room. After a long pause, he said, I paused as he said, "Where are the kids?" It was such a strange question. It wasn't accusing or casual. Rather, it seemed like he was truly perplexed, almost irritated. He didn't answer. His lips pulled into a tight line, and his eyes remained hidden behind those sunglasses. I murmured, "Moved, family relocated, and I'm just clearing out what they left," he muttered. That didn't make sense. He remained locked on the floor for too long. He didn't come inside, so I stepped back a little. "Do you still want the toys? It costs $20 for the entire set, so feel free to search through and choose what you want." His head was turned slightly, as if he was listening to I couldn't hear it. And then he turned back and left without saying anything. He didn't even look at the toys before leaving the truck rolling down the street, while coughing black smoke and rattling to life. I stood in the doorway. My heart wasn't pounding for a full minute before I moved, but something felt really off. He asked about the kids, and as he stood there, he seemed disappointed, as if he had come for something else. I locked my door and then locked mine, and I didn't call the police because I wouldn't even say a man had arrived to pick up some toys and behave strangely, which isn't against the law. Instead, I called my brother-in-law Mark, a sheriff's deputy from a few counties over, and told him what had happened. He didn't laugh or brush it off, but instead asked if he had ever been close to your side of the duplex. No, he didn't call you by name, and he didn't appear drunk or high. Mark described him as scary as hell, but he didn't do anything. Still, follow your instincts, and watch out if you that night. I kept the porch light on, and even brought an old dining chair up to the window with the greatest view of the street in case I saw that truck again. However, he never returned, so 2 weeks later, I removed the Craigslist ad. I put the bins outside the door for pickup and gave the toys to a church across town. One evening, maybe a month after the incident, I arrived home late from seeing my parents. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed a vehicle parked 2 homes down. It wasn't red or rusty, but it was. I sat there in my car with the headlights off, observing the same make and model, and after 5 minutes, it slowly moved away, without a turn signal or a rush, drifting down the street as if it had been waiting for nothing at all. I never saw it again, but 4 weeks after that, every knock. I don't know what that man was planning, or perhaps he was just weird, but the way he inquired about the kids, and how quickly he left when he realized they weren't there still bothers me. And I never posted on any of the delivery trucks that stopped along or any strangers on the street that made me shiver. I was 19 years old and starting my second year at Craigslist, and I was broke, not the kind of broke where you skip a couple coffees or cancel Netflix. I had worked with my uncle's roofing crew back home in Marquette, a small town close to the Minnesota border, during June and July, but that job dried up when we completed the last duplex project earlier than anticipated, with August ahead of me. Carter State University in Iowa. My 2 roommates, Dean and Trey, were still at home enjoying their final weeks of freedom, so I thought it would be wise to just move back to Carter early and settle in. The lease on our off-campus house had already begun in May, and I had packed up my clothes, my beat-up HP laptop, and my $15. In August, the entire region was a ghost town, with rows of old boxy houses with sun-faded curtains and a house on Redmond Avenue near the border of the college district. Many students lived nearby, but the Walmart fan threw everything in my '98 Camry and drove back to the city. Our 2-story home had a crumbling porch, dusty porches, and a permanently sticky kitchen floor, but the rent was $900 divided 3 ways, which was ideal in my opinion. The first few days alone were okay. I played outdated games on a scratched PS2, ate cheap frozen burritos, and watched lost reruns on my laptop, but after a week I started to go mad and needed money because my rent was due soon and I wasn't going to ask my dad again. He had already stated that if you want to live like an adult, then you should handle your own problems. That's why I turned to Craigslist. I had previously used it to purchase a pair of used headphones in high school and once attempted to sell my BMX bike before giving up. However, until my part-time job at the library resumed in September, I hadn't really looked at the gigs section before. I assumed that even a few days of odd labor would cover bills and groceries. I reloaded the page roughly a dozen times before I noticed something that caught my attention. Assistance needed for light moving work. $100 cash one. I'm searching for someone who can help put furniture into a van for 3 to 4 hours without lifting more than 50 pounds. I need someone who is dependable and punctual. If you're interested, text me. It sounds straightforward and doesn't include any dubious promises of modeling or survey work. The scammer's name was Mark D, and the area code matched somewhere in the nearby city of Des Moines. I contacted him, and I received a response in 10 minutes. Hey, thanks for the message. I need assistance moving some items out of a house I manage for a family that moved. You're free tomorrow morning. I hesitated for perhaps a second, but he seemed normal fast. But normal, so I'm free to SMS your phone and address the following morning, August 9th, which I remember since it on that day. My bank account reached $4. Wearing an old hoodie, trousers, and work gloves, I stood on the front porch with my backpack in case something went wrong. The sun was as the window went down. A big white cargo van that was already heating the pavement rolled slowly up the street and parked in front of the home. There was no corporate insignia, just plain white, and I stared. The man inquired, "Yeah," to which I said, and he stepped out. He was roughly 6 feet 2, and in his mid-40s. "I Mark," he continued. "Have you ever moved furniture before?" I lied a few times to help. He had a scruffy beard and a thick frame, like someone who may have lifted in his 20s, but never quite lost it. He wore cargo pants, a faded brown t-shirt, and sunglasses. His handshake was solid, but didn't linger. That was all I needed to hear when my cousin moved last summer. It won't be too terrible. Just a few larger items to load, drive, and unload. I threw my suitcase in the van and climbed inside, and for more than half an hour, I looked out the window as the metropolis gave way to suburbs, which were followed by brand new developments with houses that resembled catalogue models, bright garages, identical roofs, and phony shutters. These areas were constructed in clean, antiseptic rows with little used lawns, and finally we turned into a cul-de-sac. We stopped at a 2-story grey house with white trim, no decorations, no car in the driveway, no kids, no bikes, no sprinklers, just quiet houses that seemed to new. I walked outside and noticed that every window was covered. I added, "My family moved overseas for a job relocation," and Mark responded, "I'm already walking around the back of the house with the key front doors jammed." I waited in silence, without any birds or breeze, just heat and stillness, till I heard that the front door was now open, and Mark motioned me in. The interior was cool, clean, and had a subtle lemon cleaner scent, but something wasn't quite right. There were no boxes, labels, or moving tape, and the living room featured a flat-screen TV on A. It was the type of property you'd see in a real estate advertisement, not one that was being packed up. It had a lovely sectional couch, a coffee table with a fake fruit bowl, and a dining table with forks positioned precisely. He grabbed a hand truck from a nearby closet and added, "We're just grabbing a few pieces the company doesn't need," I said, trying to seem casual. Yeah, they left it all staged for resale," he said. I followed him and helped load the TV, a few stools, some chairs, and a big end table, because something didn't feel right. After about 40 minutes, my stomach finally screamed at me as I was making my second trip to the van. I responded slowly, "How did you get in again?" And he paused, key under the mat, no realtor. I went around the street once more, but not a single car moved, not a single window twitched, and the mailbox had no name or even a for sale sign out front, lockbox or anything. No. He kept going quickly, and I felt sick to my stomach. I took out my small Motorola flip phone, which I kept in my pocket, and pretended to check my messages before backing up toward the van. "Hey, I just got a text about a family emergency," I said, adding that my granny had fallen. "I'm sorry, Mark." His eyes stopped and didn't blink, and then he said, "You're not going anywhere." My blood froze over, so I turned and ran. I heard him yell something angry and muffled, and the van door slammed behind me, causing my feet to hit the pavement. Then I heard the van's engine roar to life as it drove out of the driveway, so I darted between 2 sheds and squatted low, sucking in breath as I hopped a low fence into someone's backyard, my heart thumping like a jackknife. Dozed off, so I called 911. My hand trembled as I told the police what had happened, and they met me at a nearby gas station 20 minutes later. I gave them the house address, a description of the van, and a picture of Mark. They then ran the plates and found them on neighboring cameras. According to the footage, the house had only been completed 2 weeks prior. The real owners, who were still residing in the Netherlands, had hired a company to stage it for listing, and none of the items were intended to be moved. The house had already been hit several times by Brian Culver, who had taken smaller items from the first few days' silverware decor. Since the neighborhood was little populated, no one seemed to notice the devices. He became arrogant and demanded assistance with the larger items, so I stepped in and gave a detailed explanation. "No, I didn't know. Yes, I sensed something and ran. But no, I didn't know his true identity, touch anything other than what he gave me, but I wanted to help, so I did what they said I should have done. Reporting him likely prevented me from being charged or worse. And later that day, when Brian attempted to pawn the TV security cameras, his license plate struck, and my statement caught him red-handed because he had a lengthy history of fraud and theft. This was only his most recent endeavor, and the owners received the majority of their I never saw the $100, but I didn't care because I kept asking myself, what if, instead of running, he had locked the door and feared that I would turn him in? He wasn't merely a thief. 4 weeks. I was unable to help him because he was desperate, and desperate people do desperate things. I continued to use Craigslist, but never for work, and I stopped looking over my shoulder every time I saw a white vehicle. Never again with strangers, since that summer taught me that the true terror isn't found in eerie monsters or haunted houses, but rather in the peaceful, bright cul-de-sac with no one around to watch and no aid on the way, and where someone with a key that was never his, like Brian, waits after 3 years at the same college in my hometown. I was itching for a change. I was prepared to complete my degree in a different location with more possibilities, people, and life. After considering my alternatives for the first part of the summer, I made the decision to transfer to a school outside of Lakemont, a little but expanding community, is roughly 8 hours away from my home, had a robust arts program and far more employment opportunities than my slumbering hamlet. Even though it wasn't precisely New York, my intention was to complete my final year there, graduate, and, if everything went well, remain on after that. The only issue was that, although my parents were encouraging, I didn't know anyone else. Couldn't provide much assistance because I had a summer job and money had been tight ever since my mom was laid off at a nearby warehouse, and although it didn't pay well, I was able to pull together just enough money to pay for relocation expenses, and if I was lucky, my work ended in mid-August, then I might get a couple months' rent before the semester began. It took me around 2 weeks to secure housing, and every night after work, I'd sit down at my beaten laptop and look through the local student housing board's listings on Facebook Marketplace. I wasn't particular about Craigslist, at least not initially, but Lakemont was a college town, and there was intense rivalry for rooms, so I sent out message after message, and the most of them went. Some told me that the rooms had already been rented, but I didn't hear back. Excellent at first, but then made requests that caused concerns, such as paying money in advance without a contract or consenting to meet in the woods behind the petrol station, which was clearly rejected right away. I started responding to listings I didn't particularly like since I couldn't afford to be in a hurry during the first week of August. Selective anymore, but one evening I saw a Craigslist ad saying, "Bright room available, walk to students on campus." The photos were decent, nothing very noteworthy, but clean. A tiny, bright room with a window, a desk, and a twin bed. The advertisement claimed it was a minute school had a student house with 5 bedrooms that was rented by students. It was less than a mile from campus, and the rent was actually quite low compared to most, but not so low as to shout scam. I messaged the poster right away because it felt like a fortuitous break, and he responded within the he identified himself as Tom Abler and stated that he worked as a part-time landlord. He lived out of state, owned the house in Tech, and rarely met his renters in person, which felt a little strange, yet he was professional and kind. I completely understand if that's a deal. He told me over the phone, "Breaker, but I can guarantee that the location is exactly as described. I can email you the lease and details of the room." He sent me a PDF of the contract, and you'll enjoy how laid back the housemates are, much like you. Appeared to be typical rental agreement material, with a few special guidelines, like the silence after 10 p.m. and no pets, which gave it a more authentic vibe. The part I didn't want to deal with once the pictures matched what he had provided in the advertisement. He apologized, saying that I had just been burned, but I will need the first and last month's rent in advance before I can hold the room. I hesitated, but that was more than $1,200, and it was pretty much all I had left. He said, once it's processed, you'll have everything in writing. If it helps, I'll send you the complete contract and receipt. Can even connect you with one of his roommates, Josh, who emailed me to say he was one of the in retrospect. It's clear that the Josh email was fraudulent, most likely composed by the housemates, and he enjoyed living there. Same guy, but it drove me insane at the moment, so I sent the money. A week later, in the morning after my warehouse job finished, I packed up everything I owned, including clothes, dishes, and old posters, and headed off. The majority of the day was spent driving to Lakemont. I was sweating, tired, and eager. When I drew up to the door, Tom, with whom I had just spoken the day before, stated that someone would leave the key under the mat. Address. I recall being relieved to see that the house resembled the one in the pictures, white siding, a tiny porch, and a tidy appearance. Nothing special, but the front yard was sturdy. So I parked on the street and I proceeded up the stairs with my backpack. But there was no key behind the mat. So I rang. A man in his mid-20s answered the doorbell and appeared to be a student. I responded, "Hey, I'm meant to be entering this open space," and the man appeared perplexed. "Believe you are in the wrong location," he replied. "No, this is 1417 Oakage Drive." "Correct, yes, but there isn't an open room and nobody is moving in." I remained motionless for a moment. Blank. "Are you certain that I signed a lease with Tom Adler, the landlord?" He shook his head. "I've been living here for 2 years, and our landlord, Maria, resides in town." Had never heard of Tom. With my heart pounding in my chest, I retreated from the porch. Once I got back in my car, I verified that everything was correct: the email, the lease, the texts, the address. The house was genuine. However, the landlord has left the folks. I texted, "Hey, I'm here, and nobody seems to know you." After trying to call Tom without getting a response, nothing came up when I dialed voicemail again, and the reality struck me like a kick to the unfortunately. I was defrauded of $1,200, and now I have no apartment, no backup plan, and nowhere to sleep. And this whole city is devoid of any familiar faces. I traveled to a coffee shop nearby merely to sit there and pretend that I was able to connect to the Wi-Fi, and began reviewing everything. I complained to Craigslist, denounced the listing, and wrote the phony Tom once again. I tried the police, even though I knew it was useless, and they were unexpectedly helpful. Detective Garvey, the officer I dealt with, told me this type of rental scams weren't new, and they were becoming more common, particularly in college cities, just before classes began. "It's difficult to catch these guys, because they use fake names," he continued, "lying to you. Emails, money transfers, but send us all of your messages and emails. We'll explore what we can do with the payment receipts." It was preferable than nothing, yet it didn't address the fact that I couldn't afford a motel that night. Thus I had nowhere to stay. I parked in the lot of a 24-hour supermarket and then snuggled up in the back seat of my car, with the windows slightly parted to allow. I hardly slept because it was still hot in the air. And the following day I began the hunt once more, posting on student organizations to find sublets if there were any. Late in the afternoon, I discovered a 7-bedroom flat in a basement. Even though there were 2 of them, it was in a less affluent area of town, but the rent was incredibly low, and they could move in right away. That evening, I met the existing renter. He hardly raised his head from his video game. "Are you okay with 6 other people sharing a kitchen and 1 bathroom?" He said, "Yeah," and I explained that it was a dungeon. My room has concrete floors, no windows, and a stained ceiling, but I accepted it as better than the automobile courses began the next week, so I concentrated on getting by. I tried not to think about the $1,200 I'd lost every day while I worked on schoolwork and slept. I borrowed or scraped together the dollar I spent now from my ramen level funds, and a month or so later, we received Detective Garvey, who said that the call was because the email he used to receive the payment was connected to an IP address. The fraudster had been foolish enough to utilize a traceable account, an address that wasn't hidden, that led to a man called Reed Jacobs, small-time scammer, who had committed a few previous crimes. They had located him and discovered proof of several Craigslist rental scams, all targeting students. I can't promise anything, Garvey stated, but with your assistance, we will file charges, and once the case is heard in court, you should receive your money back. Took months, but in the end, I received a check in the mail shortly before the court ordered Reed to pay reparations. He received community service, probation, and a rather large, attractive. I was fortunate that the man didn't hide his traces, and the cops were even luckier. I felt fortunate that I didn't give up and return home. But that summer scarred me and made me far more cautious when it comes to people's claims regarding things that appear too good to, although Craigslist may still provide some nice bargains. That was the last time I ever looked. I've ever rented it out.